The Liberty Weekly Podcast, Episode 1.
We must therefore emphasize that we are not the government, and the government is not us. The government does not, in any accurate sense, represent the majority of the people. If then the state is not us, if it is not the human family getting together to decide mutual problems, if it is not a lodge meeting or country club, what is it? Briefly, the state is that organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organization in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution or payment for services rendered, but by coercion.
But I don't like the use of force. I like voluntarism. That's what a free society is supposed to be all about.
Well, you like voluntarism. You don't see much of it coming from the White House. In fact, you called the president recently an elected dictator. What do you mean by that?
Dictatorial is what he is. But this is what our government's all about. This is what, when Congress does get around to passing laws, they're dictatorial too. Everybody's telling the people what to do. The whole process for many, many decades, this is what the whole taxing system is about.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the first episode of the Liberty Weekly Podcast. As always, I am Pat McFarland, your host, and joining me is Jerry McCullum, the co-host.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, so last time we talked a bit about some terms. In episode 0, we were throwing some terms about, according to what we believe in. Some of those terms were libertarianism, voluntaryism, minarchism, anarcho-capitalism, and there's some other terms that we'll address too in time.
Yep.
But first we wanted to start with libertarianism. And this can be a bit of a loaded term because the term libertarianism is a umbrella term that encapsulates a lot of different philosophies.
Yeah, and then there's certain institutions like the Libertarian Party that have taken that name, and people are confused when a libertarian says that they're not, when they disagree with what the Libertarian Party does, for example. So it is a loaded term. There's lots of confusion around it sometimes.
Yeah, and personally what I think is libertarianism is not fiscally conservative or socially liberal, as maybe we're getting into some controversial waters here, but I do not think that libertarianism can be summed up as fiscally conservative and socially liberal, because
that's a very watered down approach, and it makes us seem like we're just picking what we agree with from different groups, when really it's we have a foundation of principles.
Yes, and that foundation of principles is unique. Like it is not. It's not Republican and it's not Democrat. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with liberty in the individual, and that's how I see libertarianism is looking at society through the scope as billions of individuals acting according to their own individual situation, as opposed to collectivism, which is, I don't know, a way of looking at society in terms of groups. And that's kind of a Marxist thing, isn't it?
Libertarianism is inherently opposed to collectivism, I would say. Although it seems like this is something that I've seen some people disagree with recently. Libertarianism cares about the individual. They don't care about seeing people, groups of people. I would say that the Marxist theory of class conflict and the idea of like the oppressor and the an oppressed group and an oppressor group is something that is incompatible with libertarianism because it doesn't view people as groups. It sees them only as individuals.
But I think that's not to say that collectivized things don't exist. Culture exists.
Absolutely. It's you don't when you're determining what you should be making policy about or how you should treat people, you see it on the individual level. You don't do it as a group. So you don't say that
all cops are bad.
You don't say
or
all cops
something.
are bad. You don't say that. Or that the 1% are immoral people wholly. You have to use these terms, and you use groups as a way to streamline your language and communicate better. Your association with a group does not.
And it doesn't necessarily define who you are.
It doesn't necessarily define who
or
you
what
are
you think.
or what you think, and it doesn't dictate how you should be treated.
Yeah. So, I mean, the irony of saying that if you're a member of a group, it doesn't necessarily say who you are, and then we're using these terms to describe groups of people.
So this is something I actually was planning on talking about later, but we'll bring it up now. Labels and groups. There's a lot of people within our community, and a lot of people outside of libertarianism that don't like labels, and I
like labels.
I have a case to be made for labels.
Yeah.
And I it's a similar analogy to musical genres, where a musical genre cannot describe a band perfectly. So, if like a band like Opeth, you say, oh, they're progressive death metal,
Yeah.
and then they've turned or prog rock, but like you can't give one label to them and wholly understand what they are. But when you want to quickly convey to someone what something is, they're useful. So I would, I call myself a voluntarist, or a libertarian, depending on what circle I'm in, to very quickly communicate to someone what I believe. And it's a tool, and labels should be used to describe someone, not to dictate who they are. It's a descriptor. It's not a prescriptor.
Yes, and I was going to say that, but one thing is funny. My wife doesn't like using labels for anything. She will never commit to a label, and she'll probably scowl listening to this.
Yeah.
We'll have a laugh about it. But she refuses to say, oh, I like this genre of music, because she just doesn't want to attach herself to that. And I think it has to do with that descriptive, prescriptive difference.
Yeah, it's just if you think of if you think of labels as something that means that you must be like this way, then they're like a box. There's something that you have to you have to work within the confines of. But if you use them just as descriptors, then they're a tool. They're not something that inhibits what you can do. It's something that helps to communicate what you are.
Yeah, and I personally find labels to be amusing, and I use them. So, but we were talking a little bit in the last episode about voluntarism, obviously, because I think we both would identify more with that term.
Yeah.
The most with that term. And when it comes to voluntarism, we did talk about the non-aggression principle, which I think we'll get to later on in this. But voluntarists, would you say, are always anarchists, or believe the state shouldn't exist?
Yeah, they're inherently anarchists, or I guess it has to do with our definition of the state, because if you have an institution that calls itself a government, but it doesn't levy taxes, and admission to it is voluntary, and it has rightful ownership over the land that it controls, then that's something that's, it's a voluntary institution, then it can exist. But we as voluntarists and most libertarians wouldn't describe that institution as a state.
Because the state definitionally uses violence.
Yeah, a state has a monopoly of violence within a
legal monopoly.
A legal monopoly of violence within a geographical area. So that may sound kind of weird to people who aren't libertarians, because they don't make that link between the state and violence. So let's see if we can try to make that link right now, because it'll help explain why we're voluntarists. Good idea. Whenever any law that is enforced by a state is done so through the threat of violence or the act of violence. And so, say for example, you don't pay a parking ticket. Here's something benign. If you don't pay that parking ticket, and a government comes to collect for that, what they'll say is the threat is like, if you don't pay your fine now, we'll increase that fine. And so, and then if you say that you're not going to pay that fine, they'll instead threaten to what we would refer to as kidnapping, but it's more conventionally would be called jailing or arresting them. And they're going to kidnap you and
place you in custody.
And if you resist being arrested, then the government is not going to stop. This is the best way that I've found to describe it. The state is not going to stop bothering you until you either comply or you're dead, or they give up. And
they usually don't give up.
Yeah. Or hopefully that will change over time.
Yeah.
Either you comply, either you agree to be arrested, or you resist being arrested, or you try to escape from jail or whatnot until you have been killed, basically.
Yeah.
And so we see every government dictation to be to have the threat of death behind it. And so that's why we describe a government as something that has the monopoly of the legal monopoly of violence within an area, because a government it allows itself to have this violence, and the people generally within that area believe that to be
legitimate.
Believe it to be legitimate, although we would say that it is not. It's inherently not legitimate.
Yeah, and that's not to say that law in of itself. I mean, the law. So when you're carrying out the law can have violence associated with it. You know, it's just there's moral laws and there's immoral laws.
Yes.
And the moral laws would be the ones protecting people's lives, liberty, and property.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, sorry, I really want to drive this home that in a stateless society, there would be laws.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that people don't understand. Anarchy is defined like an anarchic society is defined as one that would have no rulers,
not no rules.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's a very important distinction.
In a stateless society, I prefer the term stateless rather than anarchy, because anarchy also has politicized buzzword implications.
Yes, it does.
But when it comes to a stateless society, people would generally be able to live by whatever rules that come about. Or if you have maybe a private court system, you'd be able to subscribe, for lack of a better term, to a certain court.
There are a lot of different theories about how a law could be adjudicated and stuff.
And we'll get into this in more depth, definitely.
If you want something briefly to look over, if you search DRO or Dispute Resolution Organization, that's one of the more popular theories, which it's too big for us to get into right now.
Yes.
But if you're curious, that's a good place to start.
But just to say a little bit more on that. But when it comes, so people will usually say, oh well, if you can pick your own laws, people are going to pick laws that allow them to murder other people and stuff like that. But keep in mind that whatever laws you pick also apply to yourself.
Yes.
So that if you want to be able to murder someone, well, then someone could also murder you under that theory.
And you would have no legal recourse if there was an attempt made on your life.
Yes, definitely. So in that subject is very complicated, and I have an episode planned for that in my mind. So, but let's move on to our next term here, and this term is Menarchism. Okay, and so. If in the episode 0, I mentioned that I was maybe a minarchist when I met Jerry. But Jerry, inherent in the term minarchy is the idea that you want the least amount of government possible, but you still believe that government is necessary to maintain an ordered society.
Yeah, to give some context, minarchy is usually used as a pejorative term to describe libertarians who are not anarchists, who are not voluntarists. And so within the name, you're someone who believes that the role of government should be very minimal.
Yes.
So it's kind of like a play off the word anarchism is minarchism. And that's like the origin of it. So you usually won't hear mainstream libertarians mention that word minarchy, but because we're voluntarists, we bring it up quite often.
Yeah, you're right. It is kind of I don't say it's an insult, but it is a pejorative term.
And there definitely are people who've embraced it, which good for them.
I mean, poster child for minarchy, I would say would be Austin Peterson, right, of the LP. He was the runner-up for the presidential LP nomination behind Gary Johnson, whom we won't talk about just yet. So minarchy, who would you say would be minarchist? Maybe the Cato Institute would represent minarchy.
Yeah. At least that's what most people would believe Ron Paul to be. I know sometimes it seems hard to nail down
what Ron Paul is.
Yeah.
I think, so this is my theory on Ron Paul, okay?
Headcanon.
I think that Ron Paul is an anarchist. He is a classical Rothbardian, voluntary anarcho-capitalist, but he is, in a sense, more of a realist, I suppose. And I don't think that Ron Paul rejects working within the system.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of voluntarists would reject working within the system.
Yes.
In my life right now, I don't know if I do or not. That's an open question.
Yeah, I personally, it's nuanced. So it's a question of tactics, which I think there's going to be no right answer when it comes to
it's all
tactics.
Opinion, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're not violating the non-aggression principle, as long as you're not violating people's property rights, then a tactic it's not immoral to use. It just may not be wise.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that there are times when voting, or there's times when becoming a representative is worthwhile. And I also think that there's a significant number of times where it's not worthwhile.
Yes. I would be sympathetic to that in saying that the working within the system, it's not something that I think is the best solution.
Yeah. And there are lots of alternatives out there between working within the system.
Including Agorism.
Yeah.
Which I guess let's dive into that.
Let's talk about that. Yeah. From what I understand, Agorism it's not explicitly an anarcho-capitalist or a voluntarist idea. I've seen people talk about Agorism on left libertarian establishments, and they like try to distance themselves from from us. Yeah, I have. There's an article in the Center for Stateless Society that was talking about how like agorism is not anarcho-capitalism, but what agorism is, it's a tactic to, and I guess I assume that there's a philosophy behind it as well, but it's a tactic to overthrow the government through.
By making it obsolete.
But specifically through counter-economic action. So you would be participating in gray and black markets.
Yes.
And that's the idea. So the solution of there being taxes in the world is not to, or in your society, is not to go to the government and try to get them to stop taxing you. It's to avoid the taxes.
Yeah.
And so, a hallmark of agorism would be, selling things on Craigslist and not reporting your income.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing.
Or actually, agorism is funny because I've been doing research into North Korea, obviously, for an upcoming episode that we're going to do. And I would posit that agorism is actually how society functions in what we would call, communist societies. Is that in North Korea, obviously, where they are socialized, or at least they were initially, you have agorist activity going on, and that's what the entire market is, basically, because the state is so poor at providing for people's needs that it's done through
illegal or not approved of means.
Yeah.
Similarly, I've heard about this that in prisons,
Yeah.
that I think it's like candy bars and cigarettes.
Yeah.
Become like the currency within prisons, even though that in private property really isn't allowed within those institutions. Which I think just speaks to the power of the free market.
Yeah. Or you have, in the Holocaust, definitely there were, inside the prison camps, there were secret economies going on with cigarettes and other, commodity monies, I would say. And that's definitely super interesting. I mean, you could posit that there's no way that these communist countries could actually have survived without it reverting to an agorist economy.
Yeah. To get a bit of an idea of what agorism is about is if you look at the root of the word agorism is agora, which I believe is Latin for market. I'm not sure if it's Latin or Greek, but agora means marketplace.
Then what does agoraphobia mean?
A fear of agoraphobia is
it's kind of fear of the open.
The fear of the open is it means a couple different things, but agoraphobia is, if you look it up, like the exact definition is like a fear of being in a situation where you can't escape, which is kind of goofy, but a lot of times how people use it in modern parlance is a fear of an open space or of a place with a lot of people in it. So you would, I'm not sure exactly the origins of agoraphobia, but the exact definition of it and how it's colloquially used is different, and that may be because the scientific definition changed over time, or it could have been that it's just people using the word improperly. I'm not sure.
Okay, but when it comes to markets, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And actually, I wouldn't identify as an agorist specifically. I'm not opposed to agorism. Actually, I would probably get along with a lot of agorists.
Yeah, totally. Same here. I haven't put any effort into using agorist tactics in my life, but it's I think it's a noble thing
undertaking,
to do.
I suppose. Yeah. Although I think agorists tend to be a little more coming at this from the left perspective, I find.
Yeah, I see that as well.
Because I know that James Corbett, who's someone that we both consume his media, he tends to highlight agorism, and he's of the left.
I'm not sure. From what I understand his history, he really started with like the 9/11 Truth Movement.
Yeah.
And or at least I think he may have started that a couple of years after it started. I'm not exactly sure when Corbett. But by the way, it's the Corbett Report with with 2 T's if you're interested in his work.
We'll link in the show notes page.
But I know that he's never specifically mentioned like a political ideology before becoming.
I thought he did though.
Maybe it's been a while, yeah.
Well, because I listen to him when I run sometimes,
yeah,
or all the time. I'm always listening to this kind of stuff. But I think he was of the left, and then discovered 9/11 Truth.
I believe that, yeah.
And that led him to distrust the government, and therefore he explored these different ideologies.
Within his content, there definitely is a lot more time focused on the evils of corporate. Crony corporatism, which is something that people who are more on the right or more free market bent don't tend to, or will agree with, but don't tend to focus too much on.
Yeah,
because
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's if you're of the right, criticizing corporations is less sympathetic than if you're of the left.
Yeah, well, and I think. With the left too, and I think agorism is more of the left, but I think there's, as I mentioned before, but I think there's a lot of focus within agorism on community building.
Yes.
And maybe not necessarily highlighting the role of the individual as much as right right.
And for sure, there's a lot of libertarians and a lot of people on the right who are more atomist, and there's a lot of people who they this is what I believe. I don't care what anyone else believes. I don't need other people to do this. There's a lot more of that, which there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
but.
And yeah, I think when I frame it, I would see the right people within our sphere who are more right are more individual focused.
Yeah.
And, leave me alone. And people of the left within our movement are more like, we can build the new society together.
Yes.
That respects the individual.
How I kind of, it's not exactly important, but I think it's interesting. But how I determine if someone's more left-leaning or right-leaning within the libertarian movement
we talked about this,
is what they bring up when they're talking about the evils of a state. And people on the right will talk about the inefficiencies of a regulated market or of legal monopolies and those sort of things. And then people on the left will be talking about the terrible things that are caused by the government, like the cruel actions that are caused by the government. So that's why you see a lot of people on the left talking about police violence quite a bit more than people on the right do. Or
and some of them really hate cops.
Yeah, really,
and
really hate cops.
Yeah, and I don't like I mentioned before when it comes to that kind of stuff. I think the left tends to be a little more. Well, no, I don't think so. Like a little more about forming a physical location where they all live together. I mean, I was going to say militia, but
yeah, I would say less so militia, because when I see people interested in militia within the libertarian movement, it's usually like paleo conservatives. It's usually because it's like Minutemen. There's people who are evoking the imagery of the American Revolution to and describing themselves with those terms nowadays. And so I'm pretty sure that those people would consider themselves more right. And a lot of them I don't think would even consider themselves libertarians necessarily, or they may call themselves more like constitutionalists, which we're not.
Yeah, I am not a constitutionalist, and we'll get into that too.
Yeah. Do you want to do that right now? Or
yeah, I mean, okay, so we've kind of stumbled upon classical liberalism and paleoconservatism here. Just to note about militia stuff, I do not support violent revolution or anything like that. I don't know how you feel, but
I think at least right now that it's not a good tactic.
No,
I don't think that it's necessarily like immoral to defend yourself from police.
Yes.
But I don't think that it's useful. And I would say throughout history that nonviolent revolutions are more successful in creating the change that the revolution wants.
Yes. And that's why I wouldn't support. And when it comes to that, I've had a lot of thoughts.
Yeah. There are plenty of violent revolutions that succeeded overthrowing their government, but then
ended up to be more tyrannical.
Yeah.
The French Revolution comes to mind immediately. Even the American Revolution a little bit.
Oh, really?
And we'll get into. I've been studying that throughout this semester, and I really want to sink my teeth into it.
Yeah, that'll be an upcoming episode.
Yep,
right?
definitely. I made a comment earlier about the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We'll get into that. When I say I don't believe in the Constitution, that doesn't mean I don't support the principles that the Constitution were intended to protect. Because I do. I just don't think. Well, there's two problems with the Constitution. Yeah. And Lysander Spooner talks about this, famous abolitionist from the 1800s, legal philosopher Lysander Spooner was. He proposed that the Constitution has no authority because none of us have signed it. It was signed a long time ago. There's no consideration. If you look at the all the legal principles behind contract formation, the Constitution it doesn't stand up to those principles.
Yeah, and I agree. And another way to look at it is that your rights don't come from a piece of paper.
They come from your humanity.
Yeah, and so it bothers me when I see people saying we have a right to this because the Constitution said so. It's like, no, you have a right to that because you're a human being.
Yes.
Not because there's a piece of paper that governs this geographical area that says you have this.
Yes, exactly. So there's the issue of consideration and contract formation, but there's also the issue that, either, and Lysander Spooner said this, either the Constitution allowed the government that we have today and gave it the power that it claims to have, or it's been powerless to stop it. And it obviously has been powerless to stop it.
Yeah.
I think that, the nature of government is to grow.
Absolutely.
And that's what it does. And the Constitution was a limiting document, and it was only intended to give the federal government the powers that were specifically ordained to it. And that has changed all throughout constitutional jurisprudence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even from the beginning. Like, from the very, within the 1790s, it was already mortally wounded, and we'll get into that.
This is something that I only very recently learned from you, and it'll be an upcoming episode.
Yeah, I'm so jacked. I mean, we've gone off on this little tangent about it, but to bring us back to classical liberalism is the paleoconservative doctrine whereby this country was founded. Is that accurate?
You would know more than me.
Okay, well, I'll continue then. Classical liberalism is, essentially it's the European strain of thought behind liberty and all those things related. I would describe our founding fathers as being classically liberal. John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo. There's some Adam Smith, to name a few. It's a belief in natural law that comes from... So, I mean, it's very similar to what we would think.
Yeah.
And foundationally behind liberty and libertarianism. But it is nuanced because classical liberals are not anarchists.
Yes.
Per se. And they think that the job of the government is to protect our liberties, which I would say, if you're going to have a government...
If you're going to have the government, that's the best thing it can do.
But it's funny that having government, by definition, restricts your liberty.
Yeah, so we don't think that's a good choice.
Yeah. So to take this whole timeline of the tradition, it begins with classical liberalism. It starts, back in the 1600s, the 1700s, and kind of grows, and libertarianism would be further down the thought process. But to come to that point, a lot of the big names coming forward are Harry Browne, Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises.
Yep.
Ayn Rand comes to mind, although I don't think she was a libertarian.
No, she. I know she was at least a minarchist, but she was within that group at that time.
Yeah.
She was a peer of a lot of people like Mises and that sort of thing.
Well, and I think and I really need to educate myself on the history of the movement itself. Yeah. Incidentally enough, Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom has a course on the history of the Liberty movement. I'll give a link in the show notes page if you want to check that out through my affiliate link. But I'm planning on taking that course, and I'm going to learn a lot. And I'll bring it to you guys probably on the show.
Yes.
But when it comes to Randian, I know that Ayn Rand called the libertarians the hippies of the right. So that's really funny. She's just a brilliant person.
Yeah.
I don't agree with, a lot of what she says. When it comes to the virtue of selfishness, her famous book.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people mistake what she means by selfishness.
Yeah, absolutely. And also there's a lot of libertarians who in my opinion, libertarianism is kind of about non-aggression to begin with.
Yes.
And then there are people who want to put they want to associate other ideas or other ideas of virtue with libertarianism, and Ayn Rand is one of the people who do that. Mm-hmm. And we, at least personally, I disagree with putting on other beliefs of what virtue should be besides non-aggression into libertarianism. Mm-hmm. There's many of them that I agree with, but they're not something that's inherent to libertarianism.
Yeah. So we'll dive into those issues too, because a lot of that stuff can be complicated. Even the whole thick versus thin libertarianism debate.
Yeah.
I'm still formulating an opinion when it comes to that.
Everything that I've read about it it gives the impression that the debate's pretty convoluted, mostly because of differing definitions. It sounds like there are times when people define thick libertarian as basically everyone in the world who's a libertarian, and there's people that define thin libertarianism as everyone who's a libertarian in the world, basically. We'll likely talk about that later.
Yeah.
But it is a little bit of a convoluted topic.
Yeah. So, but essentially, when it comes to other libertarians, there's a lot of the liberty movement is notorious for infighting. A libertarian's favorite thing to do is call another libertarian not libertarian.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of that as well.
Me too. Absolutely.
Everyone is guilty of it. But I think essentially for the purposes of this show and for, well, I guess really in my life, if you are a fellow traveler on the road, as Jeff Dice says, if you want to shrink government in some way for some reason, then you are a fellow traveler on my road, at least.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's I may disagree with you quite a bit,
and I may argue with you about it.
Yeah, and I may argue with you quite a bit. And I may think that you're absolutely absurd for believing the things that you do, but I still think that you're part of the liberty community, part of the movement, and someone valuable to be around. It's someone is not my friend, or someone is not my friend because I disagree with them on the minutia of libertarianism.
Yeah, because there's lots to disagree about.
There is a lot
of competing theories. The one that has been a flashpoint recently in the liberty community has been the borders issue.
Oh, yes.
And we won't get into that yet. I mean, there's so much fodder for new episodes that we're just coming across right now.
Oh, yeah.
So bear with us here. But I also wanted to retouch again on the non-aggression principle, unless there were any other definitions that you wanted to talk about.
I don't think so. So we can talk about the NAP.
Yeah, the NAP for short.
Yep.
Which I think is so funny that Judge Napolitano, just throwing names out there, his initials are NAP, or you could take NAP out of his.
Yeah.
So Judge Nap. I mean, that works perfectly for our purposes. But yeah, I think the non-aggression principle is such a powerful tool of communicating the message because it's so simple to understand. And I guess that would be a critique of the non-aggression principle, is that it's such a fundamental axiom that it can't possibly govern such a complex philosophical ideology.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's the nuance of how it is interpreted can lead to a lot of it leads to a lot of our disagreements.
Yeah.
So to recap, the non-aggression principle is I think we're hearing the rain through the mics.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a little I don't want to say it's soothing, but
relax with Liberty Weekly in the rain.
Yes. We can't control that, so apologies.
Yeah. The non-aggression principle is the principle that you should not initiate aggression against other people. It's okay to defend yourself, but it's wrong to be violent with someone if they haven't first been violent with you. And the thing that that most easily covers is the example that's brought up often is the drug war and legalizing the illegality of a lot of different substances in the United States. Is that when you ingest marijuana in some way, you're not harming anyone else. You can make the argument that you're harming yourself, but that's not aggression, and it's wrong for us to aggress against that person through the use of police or law enforcement. It's wrong to fine or jail them because they haven't done anything that is aggressive.
Yeah, and it's so funny when you say, or when one says that drugs are a victimless crime, because I've used that argument in court one time. Yeah. One time. And the judge did not buy it.
Oh.
And I'm not surprised that she didn't actually, but because she was like, okay, well, society is the victim, right? And that would be a counter argument. Yes, this person is hurting society,
But the issue that we would have when someone makes that argument is that that's a collectivist argument.
Yeah.
When you say you're harming society, you're harming something.
What is society?
Yeah. If you ask someone to, they can't actually give you a concrete example or define what society is. It's something that doesn't actually, you can't point to it.
It's nebulous.
It's nebulous. And so, when someone's arrested on a drug charge, or in some other way their life is destroyed, you can point and be like, that is the person that's being hurt. Mm-hmm. But when you say it hurts society, it's, it also, first off, you're kind of making an assumption that it is hurting anyone, mm-hmm. because I know plenty of people who smoke marijuana and are high functioning individuals, mm-hmm. who nothing bad happens from them from smoking marijuana anyway.
Yeah.
And if anyone, and the argument that like, oh, what's wrong is because there's all this crime behind the scenes in gangs and stuff and whatnot. Well, that only exists because marijuana is illegal.
Yes.
They
are definitionally criminals because you've made them criminals.
Yeah.
And to hijack that, sorry.
Oh, do it.
But when it comes to, making the argument that it hurts society, I mean, what hurts society more? The unconstitutional practices pervaded in the name of fighting drugs, or the drug use itself?
Yeah, and to think about, like, when you're arrested, there's a charge that comes with that, and it's a lot harder to get hired. There's a lot of lost productivity, mm-hmm. in that person being jailed, and being in a jail also is a great place to make you even less to make you become a criminal. Mm-hmm. The idea that jails in any way reform people is absurd.
Yeah.
If anything, it's a place where you learn to become a better criminal because you're among peers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to get into the broader effects of the war on drugs, you're destroying entire segments of our population here.
Yeah.
Like you're taking fathers away from children. And yes, I'm just trying to think of, what people in my life who might listen to this, are saying to me about the drug war,
the war on drugs does a lot more to harm society than marijuana can.
Yes. Or any drug.
Or any drug.
Because you could really get into what addiction is. Are people addicted to drugs because drugs are inherently chemically addictive? Well, I don't know about that.
There are some that are like nicotine and caffeine, mm-hmm. are like that, but there is no doubt that like you can't. The human spirit is stronger than most addictive substances out there, and it's whether or not this person has an addictive personality or is interested in not being controlled by a substance, mm-hmm. matters a lot more, I guess. It's there absolutely is physical parts to it, but that's no excuse to make it illegal.
Well, I was actually listening to the Tom Woods show the other day, and there was a guy on who was talking about the work that he's done in addiction and stuff like that. And there was a study done of rats put in a cage together. And the study that they cite to say that drugs are inherently addictive, mm-hmm. is a study where a rat is in a cage and there's 2 bottles of water. One has water and one has cocaine in it with water. And in that situation, the rat always drank the cocaine one and whatever.
Yeah.
But there was another study. And that's used to say that, okay, cocaine is addictive, right?
That's a bit of a stretch.
That was the fundamental study from it. Okay. Yeah. And then there was another study that was done where same cage, mm-hmm. multiple rats.
Okay.
Rat haven. Right, we're talking about like little pools.
Yeah.
There's all these different rats. There's swings and there's lots of cheese and lots of food.
Mm-hmm.
The rats can mate with each other, and 2 bottles of water, one with water and one with cocaine.
Yeah.
They didn't take the cocaine.
Oh wow, that's
and I mean goes to show that people get mortally addicted to substances because there's some kind of fundamental, huge problem in their life.
Yeah, there's something else that they're missing.
And and they use the drugs to, withdraw from that and not deal with it.
Yeah.
So,
that's really interesting. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, it's really cool actually. But
we'll put a link to that in the show.
Oh yeah,
notes.
we'll have to do that. Remember to do that. But actually, this whole conversation that we're having about the war on drugs reminds me of the ebook that is set to release with our podcast launch. And this is a comprehensive war on public policy analysis that I did of the war on drugs, right? I go through the history of the war on drugs, talking about its roots in the prohibition movement.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, unsurprisingly for us, a lot of the private actors behind prohibition were in fact pharmaceutical companies and religious special interests. Specifically when it came to cocaine and stuff like that, the pharmaceutical companies were right there. And that's because back then you didn't need a prescription to buy these substances.
Yeah.
And because they're medicine, essentially drugs are medicine. And if you use, just like anything, if you use it too much, it's a bad thing. But drugs are there to help us, to treat us.
They're a tool.
They're a tool. And American Medical Association and the American Pharmaceutical Association noticed that they could regulate the market to take market share away from mail order catalogs and from the little guy who was operating in the small towns whom the large corporations couldn't compete with. So you have the rent-seeking behavior that we mentioned in episode 0. And so that's at the root of it. There's also other things that have to do with the CIA and the deep state. A lot of people stand to make a lot of money from the war on drugs. And a lot of shady actors are behind it. But we've kind of diverged a little from the NAP, which was our initial point.
Yes, we have.
And I see we're running out of time here. We got about 3 more minutes in our memory bank. So let's just do a little recap here. So in this episode, we talked about, libertarianism, what that means. We defined all the buzz terms. We got to the non-aggression principle. We had a little foray into the war on drugs, which I'm hoping we'll do a more in-depth episode here, but I'm specifically thinking of the people in my life that might be listening to this and talking about the war on drugs. Bear with us. We'll have more content on that.
Oh, absolutely.
If you didn't find what was said to be convincing, let us know, actually. Leave us a comment or send me an email or something like that, and we'll address it. Because we really feel strongly. I mean, this is a core thing.
Absolutely, our very most fundamental beliefs instruct us on how we view this situation.
Yes, definitely. And so, we hope that you will continue with us in this journey of, discovering liberty, but also for maybe our more experienced viewers out there who know what we're talking about. I think going forward, we're going to intermix the basic episodes with some more complex ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Or ones that are possibly more tangentially related to libertarianism.
Yes.
That aren't directly about it, fundamentally.
Yeah, so we'll have an episode more on the war on drugs, maybe a little more structured, because it's always kind of a stream of consciousness thing. But as we're settling here in on the mics, I really feel good about this.
Yeah, me too.
I just want to talk a little bit about the email list. Like I said before, if you subscribe, you will get personal email updates from me. I'll talk about, the content, obviously, every content we release. Talk about, a little bit of what's going on in the news and a little anecdotes from me. We'll also, signing up for the email list, we'll get you a copy of that ebook. I think the title now is Just Say No to Drug Prohibition, to examine these topics in depth. But also we do some internet giveaways, the details of which aren't clear as we're recording this, but we will update to you as well once that becomes a little more closer to our actual launch date. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the first ever episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. Make sure that you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever platform that you're hearing this audio here today. Thanks once again, and we hope that you'll join us for episode 2.